All right, so today we're diving into something pretty incredible, really. We're going to be looking at the Diamond Sutra,
Okay,
which has been super important in Mahayana Buddhism for centuries.
right.
And we're not just talking like one text here. We've
Hmm.
got excerpts, translations, even some annotations on the original Sanskrit and Chinese. I mean, it's a lot.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is, but I'm excited to see what we find.
Yeah, it's not every day you get to explore a text that's had this big of an impact on,
Yeah.
spiritual thought for so long.
And it's not even just one text, right? We've got 6 different Chinese translations in our sources.
Really shows you how, I don't know, how much goes into interpreting these ancient texts.
Yeah, like 6 different takes on a classic song.
Yeah, exactly. And each one brings something new to the table, like the two our sources focus on most. You've got Dharmagupta's, which is really close to the original wording,
Word for word.
and then Swanzang's, which is known for being really flowing and beautiful.
Oh, wow. So it's like having a reader's guide with different interpretations right there in the different translations.
Yeah, you really see how much depth there is, even in a single sentence, when you have that to compare it to.
For sure. Well, rather than get lost in translation, let's dive into a passage that really stood out to me. It's the one describing a day in the life of the Buddha.
Oh.
It's surprisingly normal. Like he wakes up, he washes his feet, has breakfast. Why focus on these like really normal everyday things?
It's brilliant when you think about it. The sutra isn't just about these big ideas. It's also about finding enlightenment in everyday life.
Oh.
So these simple actions that he's doing, they're like a practice in mindfulness, being present.
Right, so it's not like you have to be meditating on a mountaintop to find peace.
Exactly.
It could be as simple as like paying attention while you're washing dishes.
Exactly. Bringing that same intention to everything you do.
And speaking of intention, that brings us to another big idea here. It's giving, or dana, as it's called in the sutra. There's this incredible image. It compares the energy we create by giving selflessly to get this, to the sands of the Ganges River.
Wow.
Think about how many grains of sand are on a beach. Now times that by the entire Ganges. That's powerful. But it's not just about how much we give, is it?
No, it's more about the why, the intention behind it, the purity of the heart.
So giving without being attached to the giver or the receiver or even the thing itself makes you think. In a world that's so transactional, how do we get back to that genuine selfless giving?
It's a question the sutra really wants us to think about.
Hmm.
And it does this in part through dialogue and debate.
Oh, yeah. It's like listening in on a philosophy debate. Like there's this one part, a disciple is presenting an idea.
Hmm.
And rather than just saying yes or no, the Buddha challenges them,
It's like a mental sparring match.
pushes them to think more deeply. Why all this back and forth?
It's actually a common teaching method in Buddhism, challenging assumptions, encouraging critical thinking. The idea is to guide people to their own insights, not just tell them the answer.
Right. It's like the sutra is a personal trainer for your mind.
I like that.
It pushes you to question, to analyze, and ultimately to grow.
And that brings us, I think, to one of the most interesting and maybe initially confusing ideas in the Diamond Sutra, the illusion of the self.
Right. No self, no being. It seems like a contradiction.
It definitely challenges how we usually think about ourselves.
Mm.
We're so used to this idea of a fixed self.
Right. If I'm not me, then who am I?
Exactly. But think about how much you've changed since you were a kid.
Oh, for sure.
Your thoughts, your beliefs, your body, it's all different. The sutra says this constant change, that's who we are, not some fixed idea.
So our attachment to this fixed idea of self, that's where we get stuck.
That's where the suffering comes in. But realizing the self is fluid, impermanent, that's when we can start to be liberated.
It's like that quote, no man steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man.
Exactly. And the sutra wants us to embrace that fluidity, that impermanence. That's how we can understand the nature of reality.
Speaking of reality, there's that amazing passage that compares everything we experience to stars, a fault of vision, a lamp, an illusion, dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. Like, it's the sutra's greatest hits of impermanence.
Right.
What's the message there?
Well, it's all about emphasizing that everything's in flux. We tend to think of things as solid, unchanging.
Yeah.
But the sutra's reminding us that our stuff, our relationships, they're always changing. And if we cling to them like they're permanent, that's when we create suffering.
Like trying to hold on to a handful of sand. The more tightly you grip, the more it slips through your fingers.
Exactly. The Diamond Sutra encourages us to loosen our grip, to be open to the impermanence of it all. and find freedom in that.
And this idea of vastness, like when it talks about all the Buddhas, it's like it wants us to think bigger than we're used to.
Right, like remember those grains of sand in the Ganges?
Yeah.
Well, it goes even further than that. It compares acts of giving to like filling entire universes with treasure as offerings to an immeasurable number of Buddhas.
So it's like the scope of generosity the sutra talks about is almost too big to even imagine.
It is, but it comes back to intention. It's not about physically giving tons of gold. It's about wanting to give. It's about compassion.
So each act of kindness, no matter how small, is like an offering to something much bigger.
Exactly.
Wow. But we're just scratching the surface here. We still need to unpack this idea of right view.
Yeah.
It's like the sutra wants us to see the world clearly, but then it also questions what it even means to see.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. It's not just about seeing the world as it is, but about understanding how our perception shapes our reality. It's like the sutra saying, don't just look at what's in front of you. Think about how you're seeing it. Like, what lens are you using?
Right, because that lens, our perception, it's shaped by so much. Our experiences, our beliefs.
Everything we want, everything we're afraid of.
So how do we untangle all that? How do we see past those filters and get to like a clearer view?
Well, the sutra talks about skillful means, or upaya. Basically, it recognizes that there's no one right way to learn and understand. We all come at things differently.
That makes sense. Like you wouldn't explain something to a 5-year-old the same way you would to an adult.
Right. And skillful means is about being adaptable, recognizing that what works for one person might not work for another.
So it's about being mindful, not just of what we're saying, but also how we're saying it.
And who we're saying it to.
Yeah.
It's about really understanding ourselves and others.
Like it's empathy, compassion.
Exactly. It's a lifelong practice of trying to connect and communicate authentically.
Makes you wonder about all the ways we communicate now. Social media, texting, are we being skillful there?
That's a whole other conversation.
It is, but let's bring it back to right view for a sec. Seems like it's about more than just seeing the world as it is.
It's about really understanding the nature of reality, like realizing that everything changes, including us, and seeing how interconnected everything is.
This whole idea of impermanence, it's huge in the sutra. But if everything is always changing, then how can there even be enlightenment? Isn't that supposed to be like a lasting thing?
Good question. And it gets at the heart of what the sutra is trying to teach us. See, enlightenment isn't really a destination. It's more like an ongoing process of awakening. It's about realizing the truth of reality and then living in line with that, even as things keep changing around us.
So it's not about getting somewhere, it's about how we travel.
Exactly. And that journey is supported by things like the Noble Eightfold Path, which talks about ethical conduct, mental discipline, wisdom. And right view, that's just one part of it. But it's important because it guides everything else we do.
Like a compass.
Exactly.
One thing I thought was interesting was how the sutra says we shouldn't get attached to even our good deeds. Like, don't let doing good become an ego trip.
It's funny how that works, right? True enlightenment, like the sutra talks about, is about getting past those dualities, acting from pure compassion, not because we want something in return.
So even being good, we have to let go of that need for validation.
It's a huge shift from how we usually think.
It is. The sutra is asking us to see things from a much wider perspective. Speaking of earlier, we were talking about mindfulness in everyday life. It's a word that gets used a lot. What does it really mean in the context of the Diamond Sutra?
Well, in the sutra, it's all about paying attention to what's happening right now, with clarity, but without judging.
So just noticing our thoughts, feelings, sensations without getting carried away by them.
Exactly. It's about creating space.
So we can see them, but we don't have to react to them.
Exactly. Being present in the moment, not dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
And how does that tie back into right view?
Well, mindfulness helps us see things more clearly, right? And when we're not caught up in our own heads, we can see the world and ourselves in a more objective way.
Cleaning the lens.
Exactly. And that clarity, that's what we need to find our way.
One of the most powerful images in the sutra, for me, is when it compares the world to a dream.
Oh, that's a great one. What do you think about that? Why a dream?
I don't know. It's like when you're in a dream, it feels so real, and then you wake up and it's gone.
Is the sutra saying our everyday experience is kind of like that?
I think so. It points to the idea that the way we see reality, it might not be as solid as we think.
Like we're creating it with our senses, our minds?
Right, like that saying, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are.
But if the world is like a dream, who's doing the dreaming? Now that is the question, isn't it? And I think the sutra wants us to figure that out for ourselves. It's inviting us to look deeper into our own awareness, to go beyond the surface of things.
That's a lot to think about. Speaking of things to think about, what about the part where the sutra itself becomes the offering? It's like the sutra is saying, hey, I'm not just talking about this giving thing, I'm doing it too.
Right. We've been talking about dana, that selfless giving, letting go of attachment. And then the sutra takes it even further by basically offering itself up.
But how does a text even do that?
Well, it ends by saying it's finished, it's complete,
Hmm.
and that it's meant to be shared freely. No restrictions.
Wow, like a gift to anyone who wants it, and it doesn't ask for anything in return. Especially for a text that's been so important for so long, it's like it's saying, this wisdom isn't meant to be hidden away. Share it, study it, but most importantly, live it.
That's it exactly. It's like how the Buddha taught, right? He didn't keep his insights a secret or charge people to hear them. He just offered them to anyone who wanted to learn.
So the sutra is like an embodiment of those teachings. It's not just about understanding the ideas, it's about living them.
And in that way, it stays alive, it keeps inspiring people, even after all these centuries.
It becomes a living tradition.
Exactly.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the Diamond Sutra, what's the one thing we hope our listeners take away from this?
I think it's that the Diamond Sutra isn't just some ancient relic,
All right.
It's not just something to be studied from afar. It's an invitation to look inside ourselves, to change, to grow.
To ask ourselves, how can I actually live these teachings?
Exactly. It starts with questioning our assumptions, with being more compassionate, with realizing that each of us can make the world a better place.
And that journey, it's going to look different for everyone, right?
Absolutely. There's no one right way to do this. The sutra gives us a framework, but it's up to each of us to find our own way.
It's about taking what we need and leaving the rest, using this ancient wisdom to help us navigate life's ups and downs. Well, thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through the Diamond Sutra. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep seeking truth.